My daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "Pay rent, or get out." I thought I misheard. This was the same girl whose lunch I packed every day for school, whose forehead I kissed when she had fevers, whose entire childhood played out in the very rooms she now wanted rent for. But she wasn't joking. Her husband stood behind her, arms crossed, like a landlord waiting for a tenant to break. And in that moment, I realized, I wasn't her father anymore. I was just another bill they couldn't afford. You don't just stop being a father because your kid grows up. You don't clock out. It's a lifelong thing, every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every late-night call. That's what I believed. That's what my wife, Marjorie, and I built our life on. We didn't have much, but we had love, patience, and a front porch that welcomed everyone. Marjorie passed away when our daughter, Lily, was only 9. Ovarian cancer. Quick and cruel. I remember the day she told me. She held my hand and said, "Promise me you'll raise her kind. Not strong, not smart, kind." That was Marjorie. Always about the heart. So I threw myself into fatherhood. Worked long hours at the lumber mill and picked up part-time maintenance jobs on weekends. There were nights I'd come home so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but I still made sure Lily had a warm meal and someone to help with her homework. We had this little ritual: every Friday night, no matter what, we'd sit on the couch with popcorn and watch a movie. I let her pick, even if it meant watching the same animated princess flick a dozen times. I remember one summer she got it in her head to build a treehouse. She was maybe 10. I told her I didn't have the time or energy, but she pouted and said, "But you're the strongest dad in the world." Damn if that didn't melt me. We spent 3 weekends on that thing. Crooked, a little wobbly, but she loved it. Called it, the Sky Castle. Lily was always smart, sharp in a way that sometimes made me feel out of my depth. She got a scholarship to a state university. I couldn't believe it. I cried at her graduation. Big, stupid tears. I kept thinking how proud Marjorie would have been. I even whispered it aloud, "We did it, honey." When she met Derek, her now husband, I'll admit I wasn't thrilled. He was polite, sure, but he had this way of looking at everything like he already owned it. Still, I kept quiet. Lily was happy, and that's all that mattered. I helped pay for the wedding, dipped into my retirement to give her the day she dreamed of. Never asked for a penny back. After the wedding, they moved into a small apartment. I kept the house. It felt empty without her, but I filled the silence with projects. Fixed the squeaky fence. Painted the kitchen. Talked to Marjorie's photo more often than I care to admit. Then, 3 years ago, I had a stroke. Nothing major, thank God, but enough to shake us all. Lily offered to have me move in with them. She said it'd only be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. I was hesitant. "I'm not ready to be taken care of," I said. But she smiled and said, "You took care of me. Now let me return the favor." So I signed the house over to her, thinking it was the smart thing to do. Consolidate assets, avoid probate. It was all paperwork jargon, but I trusted her. She was my daughter. My Lily. At first, living with them wasn't bad. Derek mostly kept to himself, the kids were sweet, and Lily tried to make space for me. I helped around the house, cooked dinner on weekends, and even took the grandkids to school when I was able. I felt useful. But over time, little things changed. Subtle at first. The way Derek would correct me at the dinner table. The way Lily would sigh when I asked for help with the TV remote. I chalked it up to stress: 2 kids, full-time jobs, a cramped house. Still, I held on to the good memories. Like the night Lily turned 12 and I let her stay up late watching shooting stars. We lay on the roof, bundled in blankets, and she whispered, "Promise me you'll live forever." I laughed and said, "Only if you promise to visit me when I'm old and grumpy." Those promises seem so far away now. It's strange, how you can give someone everything, and still end up feeling like an intruder in their life. When I told Lily I was thinking of moving back into the old house once my health improved, her face went stiff. "It's more complicated now, Dad," she said. "With property taxes, and the mortgage, we'd have to talk to Derek." That was the first time I felt something was off. Like I'd become a liability. But I pushed the thought away. After all, these were the same hands that once held my face and said, "You're the best daddy in the world." Surely those hands couldn't push me out. Could they? It started with the coffee. I've had the same morning routine for over 40 years, wake up before the sun, boil water, and enjoy a quiet cup of instant coffee on the porch. That porch used to face the rising light perfectly, and even now, in Derek and Lily's house, I tried to keep that small piece of my old life going. But one morning, the coffee jar was gone. I searched the cupboard, the pantry, even the trash. When I asked Lily, she just said, "Oh, Dad, that brand has too much sugar and caffeine. We're switching to organic blends now. Better for everyone." She waved it off with a smile, but it didn't feel like a gesture of care. It felt like being told I didn't get a say. Then came the shoes. Derek tripped on my old work boots one afternoon, muddy from a short walk I took to stretch my legs, and instead of laughing it off, he snapped, "If you're going to live here, at least keep your junk out of the hallway." Lily didn't say a word. Just watched, arms crossed, as I picked them up in silence. I told myself it was stress. Maybe they were struggling financially, maybe the kids were wearing them thin. I tried to do more around the house, wash the dishes, fold laundry, cook dinner twice a week. But every time I offered, Lily would wave me off or tell me I was making more work. Eventually, they stopped inviting me to the dinner table. At first, they claimed it was because the kids had homework and things were rushed. Then, it was, "We're doing keto, Dad, and your meals don't really work with it." I began eating in my room, alone. I noticed things changing behind closed doors, too. I'd walk past their bedroom and hear my name. Sometimes muffled, sometimes sharp. "He's not paying anything." Well, it's not like we can just kick him out. "We can't afford 3 adults in this house, Lily." That last one hurt. Not because it was untrue, I knew I wasn't contributing financially anymore, but because of how casually it was said, like I was a guest who'd overstayed. Then, the locks started appearing. First, the basement door. Then the garage. Then the second fridge in the laundry room, where they used to store leftovers and kids' snacks. I opened it one day to grab a yogurt, only to find a combination lock drilled onto the handle. I stood there, hand frozen mid-air, just staring at it. When I asked, Lily laughed nervously and said, "It's just to keep the kids out. They sneak snacks." But I wasn't a fool. The grandkids were too small to reach that fridge. That lock wasn't for them. It was for me. I started noticing how Derek always seemed irritated around me. If I adjusted the thermostat, he'd change it back within minutes. If I opened a window, he'd close it. Once, I left a glass in the sink, and an hour later, it was sitting outside my bedroom door, washed, dried, and placed neatly on a towel like some kind of passive-aggressive message. I tried to talk to Lily about it one afternoon. We were alone, Derek had taken the kids to the park, and I said, "Is something going on, sweetheart? I feel like I'm in the way." She didn't look up from her phone. "You're not in the way, Dad," she said flatly. "It's just, we have routines. It's a full house. We're adjusting." "Adjusting," I repeated, staring at her. "Lily, do you remember when you broke your wrist falling off that treehouse?" She blinked, confused. "You cried all night," I said, voice trembling. "And I sat up with you, icing your hand every hour, humming the lullaby your mother used to sing. I didn't sleep for 3 days." She stared at me, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, regret, maybe. Or guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "That was a long time ago, Dad," she said, almost coldly. I nodded. That was the end of the conversation. After that, things got worse. I overheard Derek saying they should look into what seniors are doing these days, like independent living places. Lily didn't protest. She just sighed and said, "Not yet. Not yet." Those two words circled in my head for days. I wasn't family anymore. I was a cost-benefit analysis waiting for a decision. I began to feel like a ghost. Even the grandkids started mimicking the distance. One day, my granddaughter walked past my room and muttered under her breath, "Mom says you're not supposed to touch our food." She couldn't have been older than 7. I spent my nights looking at photos, Marjorie in her Sunday dress, Lily as a toddler in the sprinkler, the three of us smiling in front of the Christmas tree. I kept those memories like a man holds onto fire in the middle of winter. But I also began keeping notes. Mental tallies. Small signs. Locked fridges. Whispers. Resentment. Because deep down, I was beginning to understand something I didn't want to admit. This wasn't just a rough patch. They didn't want me here. It happened on a Sunday. The kind of day that used to mean roast beef, laughter, and family piled into the living room watching football with crumbs on their shirts. But that Sunday, I sat at the edge of the kitchen table, quietly peeling an apple while the rest of them buzzed around with some strange tension in the air. Derek was dressed too nicely for just another weekend, collared shirt, polished shoes, and the kids were fidgeting, already halfway to the door. I asked, "Where's everyone off to?" Lily didn't look at me when she said, "Brunch with some friends. We'll be back late." No invitation. No mention of a plate left behind. Just an empty house waiting for me after they were gone. That wasn't the betrayal. Not yet. The betrayal came that evening. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through a photo album, when I heard the door open. Laughter. High heels clacking. Then Derek's voice, "At least he stayed put this time." They walked in carrying shopping bags, expensive ones. Lily was smiling. Glowing, even. I stood to greet them, and before I could speak, Derek waved his hand and said, "Careful, don't bump the centerpiece." There was a new vase on the dining table. Tall. Crystal. Ridiculous. I looked at Lily. "You bought that?" She nodded. "It's an antique. Real baccarat. On sale, believe it or not. It must have cost more than my pension check." And I said the only thing that came to mind, "Must be nice." She turned to me, the smile gone. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. And that's when Derek stepped in, with that smug smile he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. "Look," he said, "maybe it's time we talk about the arrangement here. You've been staying with us for years now. Utilities, food, space. We've never asked for a thing, but that's not really sustainable anymore, is it?" I just stared at him. Lily crossed her arms. "Dad, it's not personal. We're just in a different phase of life. We need space, we need fairness." "Fairness?" I asked quietly. "You mean charging your father rent for the house he gave up for you?" "That house was signed over legally, Dad. We pay the mortgage now. That was the deal." There was no deal. There was just trust. And the moment I signed the deed to my house over, that trust became paper for them to crumple. Derek leaned in, smug as ever. "We're not saying you have to leave. Just contribute. Help us with expenses. Rent's not unreasonable." "And if I can't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Lily said nothing. The next day, I found a typed-up notice slipped under my bedroom door. It was printed on thick paper, too formal, too clean. It read like a rental agreement, with a monthly amount and due dates. And in bold at the bottom, failure to comply may result in a re-evaluation of your residency. Residency. That's what I had become, a tenant. I took that piece of paper and walked into the kitchen, where Lily was sipping tea at the counter like nothing had happened. "Did you really think this was the way?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She sighed. "Dad, I don't have time for guilt trips. We have bills. This house was mine," I snapped. "Every floorboard, every inch of drywall. I built it. Your mother picked the curtains. You took your first steps in that hallway." She wouldn't look at me. Just kept stirring her tea like she didn't hear. I turned to leave. As I passed her, I said, "Your mother would be ashamed." That got her attention. She slammed the mug down. "Don't bring Mom into this. You think she'd want us broke because you can't let go of the past?" I didn't answer. I just walked back to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. Not with anger, though God knows I had enough of it, but with grief. Raw, bitter grief. Because in that moment, it hit me. She didn't see me as her father anymore. That night, I heard them laughing in their bedroom. Music playing. Glasses clinking. And I sat alone, holding an old photograph, Marjorie in her apron, Lily on her hip, me behind them with flour on my nose. I stayed up till dawn. The next morning, I went into the garage and looked around. Most of my belongings, tools, photo boxes, fishing rods, were shoved into a corner behind Derek's gym equipment. Dusty, forgotten. There was a broken sign from my retirement party, "Thank you for building a lifetime." What a joke. I spent that day in silence. Watching. Listening. And for the first time, I began thinking not just about what they had taken from me, but what I still had control over. Because if they wanted me out, maybe it was time to show them what that really meant. A few days after the so-called rent notice, I found something that changed everything. It was accidental, really. I was taking out the trash, one of the few household tasks still considered safe for me, and the bag tore on the side of the bin. Papers spilled onto the driveway. I crouched to gather them, muttering to myself about cheap garbage bags, when I saw a corner of a yellow envelope, folded and tucked under a crumpled magazine. I reached for it. The label read, "Residential Transfer Packet, Notarized." My heart started pounding. I unfolded the papers, hands trembling. Inside were copies of legal forms. Not just any forms, documents from a real estate attorney. Ones involving my old house. The house I'd signed over to Lily in good faith. And at the bottom of the first page was a printed note, "Please return signed power of attorney within 10 business days." Power of attorney. I sat down on the porch steps, the cold seeping into my knees. My own daughter was preparing paperwork, behind my back, to take full legal control. Over my finances. Over my medical decisions. Over everything. I read the document twice more. Hidden among the legal jargon were phrases that stuck in my chest like thorns: irreversible authority, management of assets, transferal rights. This wasn't about rent. It wasn't even about space. They were planning for life without me, while I was still alive. I put the papers back in the trash, exactly as I found them, and took the rest to the curb like nothing had happened. That evening, I said nothing. Just nodded as Derek told his usual long-winded stories about work and traffic. Lily scrolled on her phone while the kids smeared spaghetti sauce on their cheeks. But my ears were wide open. Every whisper. Every late-night door creak. Every passive comment. I began to notice patterns, code phrases almost. "We just need him to sign this one thing. Once it's done, we can move forward. Don't say anything around the kids. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The next day, I went to the library. I told them I was researching estate planning, but what I was really doing was trying to understand just how much of my life I'd signed away. The librarian, a sweet woman in her 60s, pointed me toward a book on elder financial abuse. I read that book cover to cover in 3 hours. And for the first time in my life, I felt shame not because of what someone had done to me, but because I had let it happen. I had raised Lily to be independent, strong, clever. And now, I was facing the ugliest version of all three. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering Marjorie's voice. Her last words, so soft I had to lean in to hear them, "Don't let the world turn her hard, Henry. Keep her soft." I failed. The next morning, I pulled out a box from my closet. Inside were old family documents, birth certificates, tax returns, the original deed to the house. I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years and found a letter Marjorie wrote before she passed. She had sealed it in an envelope marked, "For Henry, when you don't know what to do." I opened it with shaking hands. It wasn't long. Just a single page. But her words brought me to tears. If you're reading this, you're probably feeling lost. I wish I could hold your hand right now, love. But remember, kindness is not weakness. You can protect your heart and still walk with dignity. If Lily ever forgets the man you are, remind her, but do it without losing yourself. That night, I began to observe differently. Not with hurt, but with clarity. I watched how Derek talked about money like it was oxygen. How Lily flinched when her boss called on speakerphone. How the bills piled up in the hallway tray unopened. They weren't just being cruel. They were being desperate. And desperation made people do unforgivable things. I overheard a phone call, Lily speaking softly in the bathroom. "No, he hasn't signed it yet." "I know, but once it's done, we can refinance the mortgage and finally breathe a little." Refinance. So that's what it was. They weren't just after control, they wanted to use the house as collateral. My house. The one Marjorie and I poured every penny and prayer into. They wanted to gamble it all, and if I got in the way? Well, they had a plan for that, too. I went back to the library the next day. This time, I asked about notaries. A man at the front desk gave me a number and a knowing look. "Heard that story before," he said. "Sad, but you're not the only one, sir." That shook me more than anything. I wasn't alone in this. There were others, fathers, mothers, grandparents, pushed aside once their usefulness ran out. All of them holding on to photos, recipes, memories, and being handed paperwork in return. That night, I stood in the kitchen as Lily chopped onions, her back to me. "Do you remember when you were 6, I said, and you wanted to make pancakes for breakfast?" She paused, knife hovering mid-air. "You poured flour all over the floor. Took me 2 hours to clean it up. But you came running into my arms covered in batter and said, 'I made love cakes, Daddy.'" She turned. Smiled. For a second, I saw my little girl. And then it vanished. "I don't have time for nostalgia right now, Dad. I'm cooking." I nodded. So was I. I was cooking up something too, something they wouldn't see coming. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. The morning I decided to confront Lily, the sky was overcast. Heavy clouds pressed down on the neighborhood like a warning. I remember thinking how fitting that was, like even the weather understood what was about to happen. I waited until Derek had taken the kids to soccer practice. I didn't want an audience, and I certainly didn't want him chiming in. This was between me and my daughter, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders through muddy fairgrounds, not the woman now scheming behind my back. She was sitting at the kitchen island, reading something on her laptop with her usual distracted frown. I stepped in and cleared my throat. "Lily," I said, as gently as I could, "we need to talk." She didn't look up. "Can it wait, Dad? I'm in the middle of something." "No," I said, firmer this time. "It really can't." That got her attention. She glanced up, her eyes wary. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. "I found the documents in the trash. The power of attorney. The property papers. I know what you and Derek are planning." Her face changed, not shocked, not guilty, but defensive. Like a child caught stealing and already preparing the excuse. "Dad," she began, but I held up my hand. "No more lies, Lily. Just talk to me." She sighed and pushed the laptop aside. "It's not what you think. We were just trying to protect the family's future. You're getting older, and things get complicated when..." "When what?" I interrupted. "When a man gets sick? When a father becomes an inconvenience?" She didn't answer. "You're not protecting me," I said, quieter now. "You're protecting your debt. You're using my home, the one I built with your mother, as leverage." She leaned forward, voice tight. "Dad, you don't understand the kind of stress we're under. The mortgage, the car payments, the kids' tuition, Derek's hours were cut. We needed options. And stealing from your father was one of them?" She flinched at the word stealing. "Good. You signed the house over willingly," she said quickly. "We've done nothing illegal." "But you've done everything wrong," I replied, my voice shaking. "You didn't come to me like a daughter. You plotted like a stranger." She looked down, silent. For a few seconds, all I heard was the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Then she said, "I was going to talk to you. I just didn't know how." "That's the part that breaks my heart the most," I whispered. "That you ever had to think about how to speak to me." She blinked fast, trying to hold something back, but her jaw clenched again, and she said, "You think it's easy raising a family in this economy? You think it's easy watching your savings vanish while you sit in that room, reading newspapers, and humming to yourself like you're still in 1975? I didn't respond. I just looked at her, and that silence spoke louder than any argument. She shook her head and muttered, "You don't get it. You don't understand what it's like to struggle." That was when something inside me snapped, not with rage, but with the kind of pain that has no voice. I stood there, remembering all the winters I patched our leaking roof with tarp and nails, the nights I skipped meals so she could have seconds, the back-breaking double shifts at the lumber mill while my bones screamed for rest. And this was the child who now said I didn't know what it meant to struggle? I turned and walked away. From that day forward, I said less and listened more. I started watching them both closely, how they avoided eye contact, how they whispered behind closed doors, how they never asked me anything unless it involved a signature. The next week, I got a visit from someone I hadn't seen in years, my old neighbor, Frank. Frank and I used to play cards on weekends. We served in the same veterans group for a while before his knees gave out. He'd heard about my stroke and stopped by with a tin of cookies his wife had made. "You look thinner," he said bluntly as we sat on the porch. "Less appetite these days," I admitted. He looked around, squinting toward the house. "Your girl treatin' you okay?" I paused, then said, "They're busy." "That ain't what I asked," he said, eyeing me. After a long silence, I finally said, "Things have changed. It's not the home it used to be." Frank reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled brochure. "My niece works for a lawyer. He deals with elder law, that kind of thing. Real quiet. Real discreet." I took the paper and folded it into my pocket. "I'm not suing anyone," I said softly. "I didn't say you should," he replied. "But maybe it's time you stopped playing defense." That night, I reread Marjorie's letter again. Her handwriting, always so neat, carried weight even now. You can protect your heart and still walk with dignity. So I started preparing. I made phone calls from the library. Quiet ones. I called an estate planner, then a realtor. I went into town and met with a notary Frank recommended. I didn't tell a soul, not even Lily. Every step felt like reclaiming a part of myself they had tried to bury under guilt and gaslighting. The final straw came the following weekend. I overheard Derek laughing with a friend on speakerphone. Worst case scenario? We just stick him in assisted living. There's a place down the highway with bingo and applesauce. He'll love it. I stood behind the hallway wall, fists clenched. No. I wouldn't let them put me in a corner, not like that. I walked back to my room, closed the door, and pulled out a blank notebook. And on the first page, I wrote. They wanted rent. Instead, I'll give them a reminder of who I am. The law office was tucked between a florist and a dentist's clinic, unassuming, quiet, and exactly what I needed. It was a Tuesday morning when I walked in. The receptionist looked up and smiled politely, probably expecting I was someone's grandfather waiting for a ride. When I told her I had an appointment with Mr. Gallagher, her eyebrows rose ever so slightly. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from him, a gray-haired, no-nonsense man with thick glasses and a deeper understanding in his eyes than he let on. He didn't ask me why I was there. He simply opened a folder and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the house, the stroke, the signed-over deed, the rent notice, the whispers, the trash-discovered power of attorney. I told him about Lily's shifting voice, the locked fridge, the way Derek laughed about sticking me in a home. And through it all, Gallagher never interrupted. He just nodded and scribbled in his notepad. When I finished, he sat back and sighed. "Mr. Collins," he said, "what you're dealing with is, unfortunately, not uncommon. But the good news is, you still have control over the most important thing, your legacy." "My legacy?" I echoed. "Yes," he said. "What you leave behind. And more importantly, who you leave it to." I swallowed. I thought about going back to the house. Taking it back. But it's already in her name. That part's done. He nodded. "Maybe. But there are other assets. Savings, bonds, pension benefits. More than that, there's the message your estate sends. That's what they'll remember." So we began. It took 2 hours, but by the end of it, I had a new will. Clean, airtight, and brutal in its honesty. Lily was removed entirely. Everything, what little I had, was to go to a housing trust in Marjorie's name. A small foundation that would help elderly men pushed out by family or circumstance. Gallagher helped me word it carefully, for the dignity and care of men left behind. I even included the no contest clause. He called it a firewall. If she contests this, Gallagher explained, the whole thing goes to charity. Every last penny. No loopholes. No bargaining. As I held the final draft in my hands, I expected to feel triumph. But I didn't. I felt hollow. Tired. Like I had just cut off my own arm to save the rest of me from rotting. Gallagher must have seen the look in my eyes. He leaned forward and said, "You're not doing this out of revenge. You're doing this because it's the only justice left." I nodded slowly. "She was a good kid once." "They always are," he said quietly. On the way out, I passed a mirror in the hallway and stopped. For a moment, I didn't recognize the man looking back. My shoulders were hunched, my eyes dull, skin sallow from too many meals skipped and too many nights sleeping with one eye open. But deeper in that reflection was something else, resolve. A spine I thought I'd lost. When I got home, Lily was in the kitchen arguing with Derek. She looked up as I entered, gave me a tight smile, then went back to her whispering. I walked past them like a ghost, went to my room, and locked the door. That evening, I pulled out a box from my closet and began sorting. Old documents, war medals, Marjorie's favorite sweater still folded like it was waiting to be worn. I opened a drawer and found an envelope I had written years ago but never sent. To Lily, for when I'm gone. I tossed it into the trash. Instead, I started a new one. To whom it may concern, I wrote. This is not a letter of spite. It's a letter of clarity. I spent my life building a home, not just with nails and paint, but with late-night stories, scraped knees kissed better, and sacrifices made in silence. I wrote until my hand cramped. And when I was done, I sealed the letter and placed it next to the will. I slept soundly for the first time in months. Over the next few days, I acted normal. I smiled at the grandkids, nodded politely at Derek, and even thanked Lily when she left a casserole outside my bedroom door, though I noticed it was store-bought, not homemade. Inside, though, I was different. I had made my decision. One morning, I went out to the front porch and sat with a cup of coffee I brewed from beans I bought myself, quiet rebellion. The sun warmed my face, and for a moment, I imagined Marjorie beside me. Her voice was clear in my memory. You can be kind, Henry. But don't ever be naive. I whispered back, I'm not, love. Not anymore. The plan was set. The papers were notarized. Copies secured in places only I knew. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to wait, for the right moment. And when it came, I would show them that some fathers don't need fists or fury to make a point. Just a pen. It happened just 3 days after I finalized the will. I was sitting at the kitchen table alone, sorting through a few of my late wife's recipe cards, things I hadn't touched in years. Marjorie's handwriting was still graceful, her notes full of little comments like, add a dash of cinnamon, don't tell Henry. I smiled at that. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was, what I'd become. Then Lily walked in, holding her phone in one hand and a folder in the other. She didn't greet me. Just slapped the folder onto the table like a dealer laying down a losing hand. What's this? I asked, without reaching for it. It's from the bank, she said flatly. We're refinancing. The new lender needs your signature to finalize the paperwork. I froze. The folder was thick, full of tabs and highlighted lines. I could already see my name on several pages, typed, underlined, ready for me to scrawl a pen across and vanish from the last bit of control I had over anything. I looked up at her. You didn't even ask, I said. You just assumed I'd go along. It's just a formality, she said, too quickly. You're not losing anything. It's just to help us consolidate, Anne. No, I cut in. My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. You're not refinancing with my name. You've done enough. She blinked. Excuse me? I stood slowly and pushed the folder back across the table. You're excused. That's when Derek walked in from the garage, car keys jangling in his hand and that same infuriating smirk on his face. We got a problem? He asked, glancing between us. Lily crossed her arms and turned toward him. He won't sign. Derek rolled his eyes and leaned against the doorway. Look, Henry, this is bigger than you. We've been carrying you for years. The least you could do is help us out when it actually matters. Carrying me? I repeated, more to myself than to him. You think feeding me frozen dinners and locking up leftovers counts as support? He snorted. We gave you a roof. It was my roof, I snapped, my voice finally rising. You wouldn't have this house if I hadn't signed it over. If I hadn't trusted you. There was a long silence. Even Lily didn't speak. Derek finally shrugged. Fine. Don't sign. But don't expect to keep freeloading here. We've talked about it, and this isn't working anymore. You've got until the end of the month to find another place. I looked at Lily, hoping, foolishly, that she'd say something. Push back. Show even a shred of the little girl who once clung to my arm in the hospital waiting room after Marjorie died. But she just looked down and said, "We need to do what's right for our family." Our family, I repeated, the words like glass in my throat. What do you think I am? Neither answered. I nodded once, walked past them, and went to my room. I didn't pack that night. I didn't rage or cry. I just sat in silence, staring at the wall, trying to remember what Marjorie's voice sounded like when she was calm, when she believed in people. And the next morning, I called the realtor. I told him to list the house immediately. But it's under your daughter's name, he said cautiously. I know, I said. But the trust has a clause, added recently. If I feel endangered, the home is to be liquidated and transferred into the trust, effective immediately. It's all signed and sealed. He was quiet for a beat. I'll handle it, he said finally. It took less than a week. Lily and Derek never saw it coming. They still thought I was stewing quietly, licking my wounds, too old and too weak to make a move. But I was sharper than I'd been in years. I kept my head down, pretended to read, ate dinner in silence, and watched them plan their new life, Derek gushing about lower interest rates, Lily talking about a family vacation they couldn't afford. And all the while, the papers moved quietly behind the scenes. On a Thursday morning, I received the call, the buyer had signed, the funds had cleared, the transfer was final. The house, my house, was no longer theirs to claim. I put on my nicest shirt, combed my hair, and went to the bedroom to pack the few belongings that still felt like mine. I left everything else, their decorations, their pretentious wine fridge, Derek's stupid workout machine in the garage. I didn't want a thing they'd touched. Except Marjorie's shawl. That, I folded neatly and placed on top of the suitcase. When Lily came home that evening, I was sitting in the living room waiting. "What are you doing?" she asked, setting down her bag. "I sold the house," I said. She blinked. "What?" "I sold it. The deed's been transferred. 30 days. That's how long you have to vacate." Derek entered just in time to hear the tail end. "What the hell are you talking about?" I stood and handed him a copy of the paperwork. "It's all legal. The home has been donated to a trust. For elderly men who've been discarded by their families. You can call the lawyer if you want." Lily grabbed the papers, scanning them in disbelief. "You can't do this," she said, panic rising. "This is our home." "No," I said calmly. "It was mine. And I let you live in it. But you forgot the one thing I always taught you, homes are built on love, not entitlement." Derek looked ready to scream, but I turned before he could speak. I picked up my bag and headed for the door. "You said I had until the end of the month," I said without turning around. "So do you." It was my granddaughter's 9th birthday. I wasn't invited. That didn't come as a surprise. Lily had stopped including me in anything family-related ever since I'd ruined their lives, as Derek put it. I wasn't supposed to know about the party at all, but kids talk, especially when they're excited, and I overheard little Emma telling her friend on the front porch, "We're having a magician and a chocolate fountain." So I made my plans. I didn't want to ruin a child's birthday, but there are moments in life when dignity and truth demand to be seen. And this was one of them. The party was being held at the local community center, just a few blocks from the house I had already vacated a week earlier. I arrived 30 minutes after it started, dressed in my best slacks, buttoned-up shirt, and the navy blue sweater Marjorie once bought me for our last anniversary together. I carried a simple envelope in my coat pocket. The kind that doesn't contain cash or cards. The kind that contains truth. The parking lot was packed. I stood outside for a moment, watching balloons sway in the breeze and listening to the faint music filtering out through the open doors. Laughter, shouting, high-pitched delight. It all sounded like happiness. But happiness built on lies never lasts. I stepped inside. Heads turned. Parents stared, some recognizing me from school pickups or neighborhood strolls. A few offered polite nods. Derek noticed me first. He was wearing khakis too tight for his build and a polo shirt tucked in like he was playing golf, not hosting a birthday party. His face dropped the moment our eyes met. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, approaching fast, blocking my view of the cake table. "I came to give Emma her gift," I said, reaching slowly into my coat. "You're not welcome here, Henry," he snapped. "This isn't your family anymore." Before I could respond, Lily appeared behind him, wide-eyed and stiff. "Dad," she said, forcing a smile, "this isn't the time." "Please." "You said I wasn't part of the family," I said evenly. "That I had until the end of the month to get out." "I did what you asked." I handed her the envelope. "This is the last thing I'll ever give you." She looked confused but took it. "What is this?" "Everything," I said. "Everything you need to understand who I was before you stopped seeing me as your father." She opened it slowly, pulling out the contents. Inside was a copy of the will, a copy of the house sale agreement, and a letter, my final one to her. I watched her read. Her face paled. She glanced at the crowd, then back to the papers in her hand. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no words came. Derek snatched the documents and skimmed them quickly. His neck flushed red. "You petty, old. I left you with a roof over your head, a family, and a legacy," I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through the party noise. "You treated me like a burden. Like dead weight. Now the weight's been lifted." Parents nearby started watching closely. The music played on, but the laughter had faded. "I raised you with nothing, Lily," I continued. "I gave you every hour of my youth, every cent of my savings, every ounce of my love. And when I needed you, you gave me locked fridges and rent notices." She finally found her voice, low and trembling. "Dad, please. Not here." "No," I said. "Especially here." I looked around the room, at the guests, the decorations, the cake I wasn't invited to share, and said, "It's funny. They call it a birthday party. But the only thing being unwrapped here is the truth." Someone near the punch table let out an awkward chuckle. A few parents began whispering. I didn't care. I hadn't come for them. I came for her. "Do you know what your mother made me promise before she died?" I said. "She asked me to raise you kind. Not rich. Not successful. Kind. And somewhere along the way, you forgot." "I was trying to survive," Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. "No," I said gently. "You were trying to profit." I turned then, slowly, and began walking out. No one stopped me. Not Derek. Not Lily. Not even Emma, who I glimpsed for only a second across the room, her party hat crooked, watching something she didn't understand unfold like the end of a fairy tale that had gone wrong. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. As I stepped into the light, my phone buzzed. A message from Gallagher, my lawyer: "The foundation paperwork is moving forward. Marjorie's house will be official by next week." I stood still for a long time, letting the sun warm my face. I had been publicly evicted. Now I had publicly reclaimed myself. Speech balloon: do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't their house, it was mine no longer either. I had left the keys on the kitchen counter of my rented cottage, a small, sun-faded bungalow 2 towns over. Not much to look at, but it had clean floors, sturdy walls, and, most importantly, peace. The silence wasn't heavy like before. It didn't press down on me or rattle in my chest. It was gentle. Like an old friend sitting beside you without needing to speak. Still, the days following the confrontation were strange. I didn't expect a parade or applause. But a part of me, deep down, still hoped for something, maybe a knock at the door. Maybe Lily, eyes wet, voice shaking, saying she'd made a mistake. But that knock never came. Instead, I got silence. No calls. No texts. No grandkids on the line asking for stories or visits. Nothing. It was as if I'd been erased. At first, that stung more than I expected. I found myself reaching for my phone out of habit, staring at the screen, scrolling through old messages. Birthdays, photos, reminders from Lily to take your pills or leave the TV remote in the living room. Even the cold, clipped ones felt like echoes of connection now. But then I remembered something Marjorie used to say whenever she did spring cleaning: letting go doesn't mean you lost. It means you've made room. So I made room. Each morning, I walked down to the local park, slow but steady. I'd sit on a bench facing the lake, watching the ducks paddle in lazy circles. Sometimes, I'd see couples walking hand in hand, or kids chasing kites. I didn't envy them. I just watched, soaking it in. There was a strange kind of joy in being unseen. One afternoon, I heard two women on a bench nearby whispering. "Isn't that Henry Collins?" one of them said. "The one who sold the house out from under his daughter," the other replied. I didn't turn to face them. I didn't defend myself. Let them talk. People will always talk. Back in town, I started going to the same cafe each morning. The waitress, a kind girl named Ruby, knew my order by the third visit: black coffee, 2 sugars, and a plain croissant. No small talk, just a warm nod when she brought it over. I appreciated that. She reminded me of a young Marjorie. Not in looks, but in spirit, quiet, observant, and gentle in the way she moved through the world. One day, she brought an extra pastry. "On the house," she said, smiling. "You look like you could use a bit more sweetness." That evening, I sat by my small kitchen table and wrote another letter, this one addressed to no one in particular. It's strange, finding comfort in strangers. But maybe that's the point. Family isn't who you share blood with. It's who shows up when your heart is heaviest. That night, there was a knock at my door. For a split second, my heart raced. I thought, maybe, just maybe, it was Lily. But when I opened it, I found someone else. Frank. My old neighbor. He stood there with a brown paper bag and a lopsided grin. "Wife made stew," he said. "Figured you might be tired of microwave dinners." I laughed for the first time in weeks. We sat on the porch, 2 old men passing the time, eating stew from mismatched bowls and talking about nothing important. For a moment, the world felt right again. Not whole, but healing. The town kept whispering. Some folks gave me sympathetic nods. Others looked at me like I'd set my own house on fire. But I didn't care. Because I was finally sleeping through the night. No footsteps outside my door. No hushed arguments about money. No waking up wondering if today would be the day they asked me to disappear again. A week later, I received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a child's drawing. Stick figures, one tall, one small. A crooked house. A big sun. At the bottom, in shaky crayon letters, "I miss you, Grandpa. Love, Emma." I stared at that drawing for a long time. I didn't cry. But I felt something deeper, hope, maybe. Or the flicker of a bridge not yet burned. The silence from Lily and Derek remained. But their daughter had found her own way to speak. And that was enough, for now. The drawing from Emma sat in a frame on my kitchen windowsill, right beside Marjorie's ceramic salt and pepper shakers. I looked at it every morning while stirring my coffee, a quiet reminder that the past wasn't all lost, just scattered, like autumn leaves waiting to be gathered again. It was that picture that sparked something in me. For weeks, I had been existing, walking, eating, sleeping. But I hadn't been living. Not really. I kept thinking about what Gallagher had said, your legacy is what they'll remember. But what if I could make that legacy something I could see before I left this world? That idea lit a fire in my chest. I took a city bus back to my old neighborhood, not to the house I'd sold, but to the community center nearby. The same place they'd held Emma's birthday party. I walked in and asked if the director was available. A tall woman named Marcy greeted me with a cautious smile. I was wondering, I said, if you have a list of community housing programs for seniors. Her eyebrows raised slightly. We do, she said. Are you looking for assistance? No, I replied, I'm looking to offer some. That got her attention. We sat down and talked for over an hour. I explained what had happened, not in bitterness, but with honesty. I told her about the trust I'd set up in Marjorie's name and my plan to turn the proceeds from the house into something that would last beyond me. I want to buy a small property, I told her. Maybe a duplex or an old boarding house. Something modest. Fix it up. Make it a place for men like me. She leaned in. You mean men who've been pushed out by family? Exactly, I said. Men who feel invisible. By the time I left, she was already making calls. That week, everything changed. Frank came by more often. He brought his toolbox and a stubborn streak that hadn't dulled with age. Together, we looked at 3 different properties. The first 2 were disasters, termite-ridden or in neighborhoods too far gone to salvage. But the third one, it was something else. A worn-down, 3-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and a plaque out front that read, The Whitmore House, 1894. It needed work. Lots of it. The windows were cracked, the floors creaked, and the plumbing made sounds like it hadn't been loved in decades. But it had soul. And space. 5 bedrooms. 2 baths. A large basement. A wide staircase that reminded me of the one in my childhood home. This is it, I told Frank. He grunted. You sure? Place needs more than paint and prayer. I've got both, I smiled. And time. The foundation was ready to move. With the funds from the house sale securely transferred, the purchase went through quickly. Within a month, I held the keys in my hand. The first thing I did was walk through every room alone. I pictured beds in the corners, bookshelves filled with paperbacks, old men drinking tea in the parlor and telling stories that no one had asked them about in years. Marjorie would have loved it. I named it Marjorie's House, just like we planned. Word spread faster than I expected. A local reporter did a small piece on a retired carpenter turning grief into grace, and the next day, 2 elderly veterans showed up at the fence asking if there were rooms available. Not yet, I told them. But soon. I spent my days cleaning, painting, organizing. The town hardware store gave me a discount. Frank fixed the wiring. Ruby, the waitress from the cafe, started dropping off meals and helped organize a supply drive. It was like people had been waiting, just waiting, for something good to rally around. And me? I felt alive. There was purpose in every hammer swing. Every nail I drove was a small act of reclaiming myself. One afternoon, I stood on a ladder scraping old wallpaper from what would become the main dining room. My back ached, my arms shook, but I couldn't stop smiling. Marjorie's house was becoming real. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail with no return address, just one sentence on a plain piece of paper. "You've made your point. I hope you're proud." No signature, but I didn't need one. I folded it slowly and slid it into a drawer, beside Emma's drawing. Because yes, I was proud. Not for the pain. Not for the silence. But for the simple fact that, after everything, I'd stood up. And I hadn't just walked away. I'd built something new. By the end of that second month, Marjorie's house no longer felt like a dream, it felt like home. The floors no longer groaned in protest when you walked across them. The kitchen had been scrubbed back to life, its windows letting in streams of morning light that danced across the counters. The dining room had a long table built from repurposed wood, Frank's idea, and every chair was mismatched, donated from churches, thrift stores, and kind neighbors who understood what we were building. The first resident was a man named Wallace. He was 81, a retired machinist with no family left and a heart condition that kept him out of most public housing programs. He arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a folder of medical papers. We gave him room 3 upstairs, the one with the wide window and the sturdy headboard, and I watched his face light up like he hadn't had a door to close in years. "This place feels like someone cared before I walked in," he said quietly, running a hand along the window ledge. "That's rare." Within 3 weeks, we had 4 more men. A soft-spoken painter who lost his home when his daughter's husband emptied his bank account. A retired postman whose own children moved overseas and stopped calling once they'd built new lives. A man named Ed who hadn't spoken more than 2 words in 5 years, until he saw the house and whispered, she'd have loved the garden. Each of them arrived carrying years of silence and left their bags of shame at the door. We shared chores. Cooked together. Took turns tending the tiny vegetable patch in the back. Frank and I built a wooden sign for the porch, "Marjorie's house, all are welcome." One evening, while we sat sipping tea under the stars, Wallace turned to me and asked, "What made you do this?" I looked down at the chipped mug in my hands. "My daughter told me to pay rent or get out," I said. "So I got out, and gave that rent to someone who'd never say that to their father." He nodded slowly, not needing more. That was the thing about these men, we didn't need long speeches or tearful breakdowns. We knew. You could see it in our shoulders, in how we moved, carefully, like the world had already told us once too often that we didn't belong. But in this house, we did belong. Word spread. Local churches sent meals. A group of high schoolers built a bench for the front lawn. Ruby, that waitress with the quiet smile, came by every Sunday with baked goods and sat on the porch with us, listening to stories. She never judged, never pitted, just listened. And something else started happening, too. Lily's name stopped stinging. Her silence became less of a wound and more of a background hum, like traffic outside your window you eventually stop hearing. I no longer checked my phone expecting an apology or a message. I didn't need one. I had found something better. One morning, I was planting tomatoes in the back garden when I heard footsteps behind me. I expected it to be Frank or Wallace, maybe Ed bringing his usual cup of weak coffee. But when I turned, I saw a young woman standing there, hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Grandpa?" It took me a second to place her. Emma. She was taller now, her hair longer. Wearing a backpack with cartoon pins clipped onto it, one shoelace half untied like always. I straightened slowly, heart thudding. "Emma," I said, my voice catching. She stepped forward, hesitated, then reached into her pocket. She pulled out a folded paper. It was another drawing, this one neater, with crisper lines. Stick figures again, but this time there were more of them. The house had a big heart drawn on the roof. And underneath it read, "I know you still love me." I swallowed hard. "I do," I said. "Always." She looked down. "Mom says you're mad at us." I was hurt, I corrected gently. "But never at you." She nodded, eyes wide and glistening. Can I come inside? I smiled and opened the gate. She stayed for 2 hours. Met Wallace, who showed her his coin collection. Helped Ed water the garden. Sat beside me on the porch while I told her how her grandmother used to sing while planting daffodils. When it was time to go, she hugged me tight. Not out of obligation, but out of understanding. As she walked down the driveway, she turned and waved. I'm gonna come back, she said. Okay? I nodded. This house is yours too, sweetheart. Anytime. And in that moment, I realized something that had taken me 74 years to understand. Real family doesn't always come from blood. It comes from who chooses to sit with you when you have nothing left to offer but your truth. It was a gray afternoon when Lily came. Not stormy, not rainy, just still. The kind of sky that doesn't make promises. I was sitting on the porch, polishing an old wooden cane one of the residents had carved for me. I wasn't expecting anyone that day, especially not her. She pulled up in a silver sedan, the same one I'd helped her buy years ago with a down payment I never asked to be repaid. When the engine cut off, she didn't get out right away. Just sat there, hands gripping the wheel like it might steady her nerves. I stayed seated. I'd already learned to let people come when they were ready. Eventually, the door creaked open, and she stepped out. She looked thinner. Not sickly, but worn down in a way I hadn't seen before. She was dressed neat, always was, but there was a tightness in her shoulders, a tension she used to hide better. She walked up the steps slowly, her eyes flicking across the porch, at the bench, the flower boxes, the sign that read, Marjorie's house, all are welcome. When she finally looked at me, I offered a simple nod. Hi, Dad, she said. Hi, Lily. She sat beside me, leaving a small space between us. For a while, neither of us spoke. Just listened to the quiet chirp of birds and the soft rattle of wind chimes from the porch roof. This is beautiful, she said finally, her voice low. Thank you, I replied. It's been a lot of work. Worth every nail. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I got your letter, she said after another long pause. The one with the will. I read every word. I nodded. I meant every word. I know. Another silence. I was angry, she said. At first. Furious, really. Derek wanted to fight it. Said you manipulated everything. But, the more I sat with it, the more I realized. She stopped herself. Realized what? That you were right, she said quietly. Not just about the house, or the money. About me. About what I became. My hands tightened around the cane. I never wanted to punish you, Lily. I only wanted to protect what mattered. She nodded slowly. And I didn't make you feel like you mattered anymore. She looked out toward the garden, where Wallace was carefully pulling weeds with the help of Ruby, who had started volunteering more regularly. She watched them for a moment and said, You built a new family here. I didn't have to build it, I said. I just made space for it to grow. I miss you, she said, her voice cracking. I miss who we were, I said honestly. But I don't miss how you treated me. That hurt her. I saw it in her eyes. But she didn't argue. Emma talks about you constantly, she said. She has your drawing on her desk. She visited, I said softly. She's welcome anytime. She took a deep breath. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Dad. I don't expect that. But I just wanted to come here, sit with you, and tell you I understand now. I see what I didn't before. She looked at me, really looked. I was scared, she continued. Of the money, the pressure, the guilt of not being enough. And I took it out on the one person who had never asked me to be more than just your daughter. I let those words settle in the space between us. And then I said the only thing that felt true. I love you, Lily. That never changed. But love isn't the same as trust. And trust has to be rebuilt. She nodded, blinking quickly. I'm willing to do that. Even if it takes the rest of my life. I hope it doesn't, I said, offering a small smile. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photo, one of Marjorie holding Lily as a baby, sunlight pouring over them. She handed it to me. I found this in an old box. Thought you might want it here. I stared at the photo for a long time before sliding it into my shirt pocket. Thank you, I said. She'd be glad you came today. Lily stood, wiped her hands on her slacks, and took a step down the porch stairs. As she reached the bottom, she turned back. Can I come again? Just to visit. Just to talk. You can come as often as you'd like, I said. But leave the guilt at the door. She gave me the faintest of smiles. I'll try. As she walked back to her car, I watched her shoulders, still burdened, but lighter somehow. She didn't ask for anything. And I didn't give her everything. But we'd shared something real. A moment that didn't erase the past, but allowed a seed to be planted. Speech balloon: was the daughter truly sorry, or just too late? Tell us in the comments. The ribbon was red. Bright, cheerful, and tied in a neat bow across the freshly painted porch rail of Marjorie's house. Ruby picked it out. Said it reminded her of Christmas mornings, when hope feels possible, even in the dead of winter. I stood there with a pair of old scissors in my hand, the kind Marjorie used for wrapping gifts and cutting coupons. Frank stood to my right, grinning like a proud uncle. Wallace and the others sat in folding chairs under the shade of the elm tree, each one dressed in their best shirts, faces lit with quiet pride. There wasn't a crowd, just the people who mattered. A few volunteers, neighbors who donated paint and blankets, the social worker who helped us get the final inspection passed, and Ruby, of course. She brought lemon bars in a tin and passed them out like communion. I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of years pressed behind my ribs. Thank you, I said, my voice low but steady. This house, it's not about what we lost. It's about what we still have. I looked at the window just above the porch, the one that had been cracked when we first bought the place, now shining clean and clear. My wife, Marjorie, used to say a house isn't a home until someone feels safe enough to cry in it, I continued. We've cried here. Laughed too. Argued over burnt toast and who left the light on. In other words, we've lived. I paused, let the silence breathe. This house belongs to every man who was told he didn't matter anymore. Every father who was forgotten. Every heart that still beats, waiting for someone to see it. And with that, I cut the ribbon. The porch erupted into applause, not loud, not raucous. Just enough to feel real. Inside, the house smelled of fresh wood polish and old paperbacks. Each room had a story now: Wallace's corner bookshelf, Ed's oil painting above the mantel, the kitchen corkboard where we posted jokes, notes, and photos. Marjorie's photo hung in the front hallway. I had it framed with the words, "Built with love. Lived with dignity." That afternoon, Emma arrived with her mother. Lily stood back at first, lingering near the gate like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. Emma ran ahead, hugging me tight around the waist. She'd brought a plant, lavender, in a clay pot she'd painted herself. "It's for Grandma," she said. "You said she liked the garden." I knelt beside her and set the pot near the porch steps. She would have loved this. Then I turned to Lily. She looked different this time. Not desperate. Not ashamed. Just, still. "I didn't come to make anything about me," she said softly. "I just wanted to see what you built. What I couldn't see before." I nodded. We walked the halls together. She said little, mostly just took it all in, the way Wallace had organized the pantry by label color, how Ruby's lemon bars had their own dedicated shelf in the fridge, the laughter from the upstairs room where two of the residents were playing cards with the local teens who volunteered on weekends. When we reached the front room, she stopped and looked at Marjorie's photo. "She'd be proud of you," she said. "And, ashamed of me." "She'd forgive you," I replied. "Eventually." She looked at me. "And you?" "I'm learning," I said. "One room at a time." She didn't cry. I didn't either. Some things are too big for tears. That night, after the visitors left and the porch lights cast a warm glow across the steps, I sat with Frank and Wallace on the swing, watching fireflies blink in the dusk. "She really came," Frank said. "Yeah," I replied. "She did. Think she'll come back?" I looked at the lavender plant Emma had placed beside the porch. "I think the ones who matter always find their way back." We sat in silence for a while. Just three old men, rocking gently, hearts a little heavier, a little lighter. Before I went inside, I stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at the stars. I thought of Marjorie, her laugh, her firm hand on my shoulder when I doubted myself, her soft hums as she stirred sauce on the stove. And I whispered, "We did it, love. Not the way we planned. But we did it." I went inside, turned off the porch light, and locked the door behind me. Not to keep people out. But because, for the first time in a long time, I had something worth protecting again. And this time, no one was going to take it from me.